Dan here, still in Zurich, and I'm answering a question sent in advance of the ENFP Unleashed coaching and community call. This happens the first Wednesday of every month. And this is a good question. I was inspired to film something here on YouTube for it. So, what's top of mind for me right now is keeping my word to myself. If I say I'm going to do something like get up at 8 or make 5 calls or whatever, I often don't follow through. Another thing that makes this problematic is I don't know if it's an ENFP thing or an ADHD thing. Either way, I feel I need to work on this aspect of my life. This is an awesome question. It's ultimately making your word count and following through on things. And here's what I figured out. I have a magic pill, and if you take this pill, you will always do whatever it is you commit to doing. No, I wish that would be so easy. Okay. So this is a tricky topic. Making your word count is insanely important. When you get in the habit of doing the things you say you're going to do, life becomes really easy. And when your word becomes meaningless, like you just say things and never do them, every day you commit to something, then it becomes harder and harder to stay on track. Here in Switzerland, I'm staying with a friend. He's training to do an ultra marathon. So obviously someone who's pretty good at achieving goals, or at least sticking to things and all that. He's an ENTP if you're curious, and has a big need for challenge. And one of the things that's funny is when I was preparing for this trip, he talked about, we're going to be getting up at like 5 a.m. and training. I didn't really understand why we need to get up at 5 a.m. Like, can't we get up at 7 and run? Like, we're not going to run for 15 hours. We don't need that much sunlight. But he's like, 5 a.m., and I'm like, okay, fine. I don't mind a challenge. We've not got up at 5 a.m. for once. And I've been joking with him, like, he'll be like, okay, tomorrow we're up at 5 a.m. I'm like, the same 5 a.m. as yesterday? But there's kind of something to that, right? Like, what happens with your words and plans and things like that. And there's two parts of that. One is the importance of keeping your word and keeping to things, and also the times when it maybe doesn't matter. Like, we haven't got up at 5 a.m. once, but we've been running, going to the gym. I'm healthier now than when I got here a week ago. And I think it's been a great trip. And we've both been following through on our training goals. So who cares if we've been up at 5 a.m.? So I'm going to approach this with two different ways. The first is, when you have certain things you want to do, like get up at a certain time, first ask yourself, does this actually matter? Because if it doesn't matter and it's like an arbitrary thing, like you fell into some weird David Goggins wormhole and you've just been like, I got to get up at 5 a.m. It doesn't matter, right? Because your unconscious is pretty smart. If you're an ENFP, you're not a dumb person, and your unconscious is especially smart. So if you're saying, I need to get up at this time, but there's not a real reason to get up at that time, you're not going to get up at that time. Because it's stupid. Why do you need to, right? That's like me here. I'm like, I know I have 4 to 6 productive hours in a day. So why would I get up at 5 a.m.? Like, I don't understand. It's sunny now till, maybe in the winter, but it's the middle of summer. It's sunny till 10 p.m. Why would I get up at 5? Right? So there's part of this is, do I actually want to do this thing, and do I need to do this thing? And you could elaborate on that and tie it in more with, how would I say, with the fact of what is the vision behind it, or what is the reasoning for doing it, right? So if you have a really big goal and something that really excites you, and that requires you to do certain things, there's a very good chance you'll be able to get yourself to start doing those things when you start making your word count. And I'm going to explain one technique for making your word count and improving this. But if you're making sort of arbitrary goals and the actual benefit or punishment isn't very big, or you don't really believe the outcome is possible, so maybe you have a goal of writing a book, but you don't actually think you're a good writer, or running a marathon, but you think, oh, you can never get in shape. Well, it's going to be pretty tricky to talk yourself into following through on this stuff, right? So you need a vision that is very powerful and you're drawn to and you want to do. You need to believe that the thing you want to do is required to achieve this vision. Especially if it's something that is not comfortable for you, right? So if you hate making client calls, like sales calls, you need a real good reason to want to make sales calls and client calls, or you're probably not going to do it. So the first thing I would do is be clear about your vision, what it is you really want, and the ways to get there. And first, before you create these really hard goals, think about the easiest way to get to your vision using your ENFP superpowers. So don't, like, before you say, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and make 50 sales calls every morning before 8 a.m. Before you do that, think, hey, is there another way I could achieve the same thing without being stressed and pushing myself super hard and just using my personality strengths? And think about that first. So first, make things really easy for yourself by focusing on your superpowers. Then once you've done that and you've narrowed the things you need to do to the things that are most aligned with your personality and will be easiest to do, then we can get into how to stick to it. So I assume you're there, right? In the last 10 seconds, you've done all those things? Okay. So now you've simplified things and you're actually going to achieve your goal based on using your personality strengths and making it as easy as possible for yourself. Now, how do you actually stick to doing those things? What I have found is, one, remove as much pain from things as possible, because we're going to be motivated generally by pain and pleasure, right? So if something's really fun, it's easy to do. If something's really painful, it's not that easy to do. So the way you're actually going to achieve these things, make it as enjoyable as possible. The next thing is to start to make your word count. I like to do this in baby steps. So if you're someone who has not been sticking to your word very much, then you want to start off with making small, easy commitments and actually doing them. If you haven't been following your word and then you start making these giant commitments to try and like get back on track, like, oh, I'm going to do this huge thing, and then you don't do it, and then you don't do it, and then you keep doing that, you're just reinforcing that your word doesn't mean anything. So start with super small things. Like I talk about this in my book, The ENFP Calling. Literally it can be like, I'm going to knock on wood now. Cool. I'm going to touch this ring now. Cool. I'm going to touch my head now. All right, now I've just done 3 things in a row that I said I would do, and then I did them. I started to make my word mean something. And it seems silly, but I'm serious. That's the way you do it. You start making your word count. You start retraining your unconscious that when I say I will do something, I actually do it. And you do this one at a time, bit by bit by bit, right? So then your word starts to mean something. And then you have to think about how you're going to use your word to keep up this pattern. Sometimes that means not using extreme language. I know there's the old Yoda quote, do or do not, there is no try. But I've actually done the opposite many times. When I am not sure I will do something, I will say try. I'll say I'll try to do that, or I'm going to make my best effort. Does that mean I have a lower chance of doing it than if I say I 100% absolutely commit I will do this? Yes. If I just say I'll try to do it, there's a less chance I will do it. But it maintains the integrity of my word. It allows me to keep my word meaning something by using that sort of language. So really pay attention to your language usage and what you say, how you say things to keep your word being meaningful. So that's essentially it, although I have something else to add at the end here, but pay attention to how you use your word. Reset it if your word has not been used in the most precise way in the past. And ensure that you're actually doing things that make sense to you. Don't set stupid goals. Don't try and do things the hard way. Make life easy for you and you're a lot more likely to stick to it. Now, I will also say this. There's been times in my life where I've been a rock star with sticking to things. Like I once had a schedule that outlined every 15 minutes of my day. And I would actually stick to that. I'd be like 15-minute increments, boom, 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 and I would do it. I'm not that way right now at all. And what I've noticed, and this is especially important for the older ENFPs that have achieved some things in their life already, you lose some of that fire. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, that we're not always stressed, that we're just like enjoying ourselves and like, I don't really have to get up at 8 a.m. if I don't want to, or 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whenever, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something just to account for. There is a advantage to desperation, to really feeling like I have to do something. I'm like, I'm desperate. I got to make this happen. Being broke can be a big advantage. It's helped me start businesses a lot quicker than I would have otherwise, because I needed the money coming in. So I don't have a perfect solution to that. The only thing I would probably say, and I'm being a very ENFP right now, I'm reflecting on this as I go, thinking about it, is when we're younger, when we're starting out, at least for me, I was able to use that hunger more. So I was able to say, I'm desperate, I need to make this happen. And I could force myself to, push through whatever the thing was, because I had, bills to pay. I had to actually make things happen. And so I could force myself to do shit that I did not want to do, but I was really hungry and really desperate. And so I would ultimately make it happen. And part of what makes it tougher with time is you don't have that same desperation, because maybe there's something I really want to do now, but I still got a bunch of money in the bank and all these things. Like, I don't need to do it. I'm not desperate for something. And what I think is a good approach to that, as we're maybe less desperate, is to trade in that desperation with, number one, the idea of legacy and kind of really reflecting on death. So, you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, or maybe a little older even, and there's a thing you want to do. You want to write a book or change some lives, do something important. They ain't unlimited time. You will be dead at some point. That's how I end the ENFP Calling, the last chapters. You're going to die. And I think it's an important thing to reflect on, in all seriousness, is stepping back and saying, I don't need to do this right now because I need money in the bank or this or that, but is it something that I want to do? Like, what's my legacy going to be? Do I want to be on my deathbed looking back and saying, like, I never did write that book. I never did tell my story. I never did change those lives. So creating a level of desperation and pressure, I think, through legacy and through that reflection. And I think I would probably combine that with enjoying the process. So one of the reasons that I'm making more and more time for writing in my life and setting up a lot of my business and things like that to be conducive to more writing is I just love writing. I like making these videos too. I love coaching. I love all that. But I also really love writing, and I hadn't been making enough time for that in comparison to other things I do. I love the process. I enjoy it. Going to a cafe, putting on my trance music, writing a few thousand words. I love it all. And so it's not that hard to write when you love writing. You still need some pressure to finish a book. You need a lot of pressure to edit a book. I'm not saying it's easy at all. But if you combine the aspect of enjoying the process and loving the thing you're doing with thinking about legacy and the fact that, like, hey, there's only so many weeks in a year and there's only so many years left in my life, that's a pretty good way to nudge yourself into keeping moving, making progress, and completing the things that you ultimately want to complete. So if you're young, use that hunger, use that desperation, and make your word count, mean something, and have a really big goal, something that really excites you to push you to power through the pain and make it happen. That's what worked really well for me. If you're a bit older and you've got a little too much money in the bank, I would really focus on legacy and enjoying the process and almost turning off the pressure and the avoidance, and focusing on the slow process of doing something in a meaningful, high quality way. And, thinking about what you want to leave behind and then just enjoying it and having some fun with it. All right, that's it from me today. If you want to go further with me, you can always subscribe to the channel. I publish new videos on all sorts of weird timescales. I don't honestly know when I publish now. When I have useful things to say, I publish new videos, but I've got a back catalog of like 400 videos for ENFPs. So if you're into this, you've got more than enough to watch. And if you want to go deeper, like hire me for coaching or something like that, you can go to dreamsaroundtheworld.com. See you soon.